A while ago, I smacked a curb in my 2004 all-wheel drive Toyota Sienna with 170,000 miles while it was fully loaded with gear. As a result, something was bent because the steering wheel is not straight anymore. I took a quick look at the thinnest parts of the vehicle and did not see anything obvious. Nothing clunked or creaked, so I determined nothing was broken or cracked. I cheated the tie rods to correct for the bad steering angle, but then quickly realized that that triggers the traction control because now the computer thinks the van is skidding after I made that adjustment. It triggers above 35 miles an hour and it applies the brakes. I then did a VSC reset, which can be done with some paper clips, but then not long after the rack and pinion bushings went completely sloppy, as seen by this GoPro diagnosis. And it is not at all stable to drive at highway speeds and now causes the traction control to also kick on. So now the long-awaited front end overhaul, I've been wanting to do the front struts and the front control arms. Now I'm going to have to add the rack and pinion to the mix. And of course, in typical Toyota fashion, you have to lift the engine up and remove the engine mounts before you can get access to the control arms. The time lapse does not do it justice. It was quite a snug fit, and there were times where I felt like it was being pinched a little too hard, but I just had to get it done. So far, no damage. Now, if you're doing a rack and pinion job, you actually do not need to remove the control arms, but it actually made my life a little easier removing the control arms. But I think it's easier for other people if they just lower the subframe bolts a little bit, because I was replacing the control arms. They were going to come out anyways. Now that I got the control arms out, I was able to look at them on the ground and compare them side by side, and they were indeed bent. So I know the subframe was good. To access the strut mounts, you got to take out the windshield wipers and the top tray thing that just blocks everything. Doesn't take too long, it's just annoying. I'm just disconnecting the outer tie rod. I'm not worried about the struts right now. I just need to work on the rack and pinion first. The 4 bolts that held the sway bar were surprisingly small. They were very rusty 12 millimeters, but they were so rusted that I had to hammer in an 11 millimeter because if I used a 12, it would round out. And I had to use just the right amount of torque to break them loose, but also not snap them off. Toyota does not hold on to parts for cars that are older than, 8 years old. So I couldn't just run to a store and replace the bolts. I spent a very long, frustrating time on this because I didn't want to break anything because I had nowhere where I could tap new threads or get access to any threads underneath without drilling an access port into the subframe itself. Normally the right tool for a tight quarters area like this is a swivel socket, but because I had to be perfectly straight up and down and I had to put the torque at just the right angle for it to not round off, I had to use a straight ratchet just for my own sanity. And once I was able to break it free, I then switched over to the swivel socket. But it was a little stressful working on those very, very, very small bolts that hold on this sway bar. And it's 4 of them. So it was a very long time spent on those stupid 4 bolts.
But you can see I caught myself. So you have to kind of go down a size and hammer in an 11 millimeter. You can even see the taper. It was very difficult having to put the right amount of torque on it for such a shallow head without snapping it off or rounding it off.
Now I'm just identifying where the bolts go that hold the hoses for the high pressure side and the low pressure return side.
Right there, 12 millimeter. There we go. No, don't trickle down my arm. Fuck you. Yuck. All right.
I'm using the seat belt to keep the steering wheel centered, and I had a piece of paper there to help document which way I'm turning it. Once this thing is disconnected, you do not want to overspin the clock spring, otherwise you are in a world of hurt. You might as well total the vehicle. Now I'm breaking loose the intermediate shaft, which connects the steering wheel to the steering rack. This was also very, very rusted in. The bolt came out, no problem. It just needed some convincing. But then the next problem was trying to separate the two. That was a whole nother mess of screwdrivers, chisels, and then an air hammer.
All right, and we're free. All right. Look at all that. Delicious. Automotive chocolate. Oh, yeah.
Now that all the rusty, annoying portions or tiny bolts are out of the way, the biggest bolts are always the easiest and most satisfying, as long as you don't slam your knuckle into the side of the walls.
Fucking idiot. All right, there we go. There's one. Well, we are officially free. All right, let's see. That sway bar is fucking heavy.
So, because I had taken off the control arms, this actually ended up being a little easier because I was able to tilt the steering rack forward up to 45 degrees, and that helped me nudge it around the transfer case. And this is an all-wheel drive Sienna, so I have to wrestle between the catalytic converter and the transfer case, which makes it a very, very tight fit. As you can see, I'm threading the needle right here. Normally, this is where people lower the subframe, but looking at the clearance I had, I thought that it was totally doable without having to lower the subframe. It would just be at the cost of scratching some of the lines on the way in.
Okay, just kind of just get the. Okay. Okay, I get it. Okay, I am lifting driver's side sway bar, tilting down 45. And in parallel. Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, buddy. Yeah, buddy. Oh, and the rack is out. All right, the rack is out. There's my center. Model number These were swimming all over the place. This one seemed to be fine, but I can't just do half of them.
And that leaking that you see there, that has been going on for many, many, many years. So I'm sure the curb smack accelerated the deterioration of the bushings. Because I'm not a professional mechanic, I admire daily mechanics' ability to have a workflow and keep their workplace somewhat organized and tidy. I'm not saying that, oh, if I had a lift, it would be easier, but mechanics who do this every day know what tools they're going to use every day and know what tools they're not going to need. So anytime I do a big job like this that ends up being frustrating or something gets stuck, I end up having to pull out every goddamn tool or using a tool that's not meant to be used in a certain way. And what I don't want to be doing is constantly getting up every single time to walk back into the garage. So that's why you see I have every single tool at my disposal so that all I have to do is reach across. The problem is, in the haphazard technique of getting something done, the tools do get sprayed everywhere across the floor just from trying to work fast and being frustrated. So after each day, I do this. What you're seeing here is a tidying, cleanup, and accounting for all the bolts that left, and all the tools get put back to where they're belonging. And right now you can see I'm just organizing all the bolts where they go so that I remember when I come back to it tomorrow. So now we're in day 2. I spent the morning looking for a rack and pinion and got a remanufactured aftermarket rack and pinion from Napa. And you can see this angle articulates very well how smoothly this can go in, given that you have the control arms removed, because it'll have to be dipped down and tilted very far forward in order for it to sneak in.
And pretty much where it hangs up is that second elbow on passenger side. You just gotta tap it and sneak it through here. And you can see where the clearance is between the exhaust manifold and the and the transfer case. And same thing, this kind of catches on the transmission side, but it does go. Line this up, arc it back. We're just kind of bumping some things, like I've got this line over here that I'm gonna redo anyways. That kind of stuff. Yeah, so that's just gonna kind of drop in. There we go. Okay, we are in the holes.
The rust was so thick I had to spend about 5 or 10 minutes with a pick scraping every single groove so that it could slide on easily. I packed it with a little bit of grease before sliding it on. Here's a little before and after of cleaning the threads and getting all the rust off of them. I had to reuse them. I could not buy new ones.
Okay, strictly for documentation purposes, before we bolt anything down, we're going to do a flush. Let me correct. A bleed. This is a brand new remanufactured rack, so we are assuming it has no fluid in it. The specified Detron 3 for this Sienna. Automatic transmission fluid, Detron 3.
Any vacuum bleeder kit will work. You just have to have these little nubs that just fill this hole so you can pull a vacuum. So day 2 consisted of purely buying a rack, installing the rack, and then successfully bleeding the rack, including a engine start to confirm that there are no leaks. And day 3 is going to be the suspension install and an alignment. Some of the bolts in the process of removal did have some slightly flattened areas, but I don't have a choice, so I'm now spending time cleaning them up, and they are going to get reused. Hooking up the suspension and the control arms, by far the easiest and most fun part of finishing off this job. It is day 3, and I will have plenty of time to go get the alignment done.
About to go get an alignment. I'm surprised how high that sits. I mean, that should drop a little bit after driving it. In case anyone was curious what that scissor lift looking thing is. Nowadays, there's like cheap hydraulic ones you can get. This one is like no hydraulics. It's all gears. It's on wheels, so you can kind of slide it around. I think probably weighs like 200 pounds, 250 pounds. But I've got 2 different bar widths, one for the van and one for the BMW. So I don't pull it out often. I only do it for like really big shit where I just need stability and it's going to be in there for a while. And it gives me access to all my jack stands so I can have multiple extra points of safety. All right. Obviously, there's no way I'm going to be able to get it perfectly eyeballed, but I'm very happy with how stiff that is. Wiggle, 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 and it's actually responsive.
I ended up getting a 1-year alignment package so I can bring it back multiple times. I did that because I did not have the van fully loaded when I brought it in. So I will do it again after it's loaded. And this is just a first test drive, and you can see it's actually driving very smoothly, very nicely. It was a very, very, very satisfying feeling to have that done, because I had not had that steering straight for probably like 4 or 5 years, and I'm not in the mood to get a new van at the moment. I would get a Mercedes Metris, but at the moment it's just not something that's a priority right now. Very happy with the repair. It was very satisfying.